something that happened to me in high school when we won our district championship and had our huge upset over number 4 Rochester Adams. Nobody was talking about us prior to that because we were about 500 to end the regular season. We weren't the greatest team in the world. And then we upset Rochester Adams in the district championship. We got on the Channel 7 news. We got interviewed for the Channel 7 news the day after at our practice, and it was absolutely amazing. But
Yeah.
that's one of those things where it's like that was a big event that happened. We won a championship and beat one of the best teams in the state just to get coverage.
Yeah.
And all the little things before that, like nobody was talking about us.
Yeah.
So that's my thing is just it's the little things that bring the community together because that put us on watch for the entire state. But it starts with just the Lake Orion community in itself.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Johnny Kane, and our next guest is Ayden Novak from Rochester Christian University, a freshman catcher for the Warriors baseball team. Played his high school ball at Lake Orion. Ayden, welcome back to the show.
Appreciate you having me on, Johnny. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, always a pleasure. And I like this. I like this. What we got coming here because you came across an article really about rescuing local journalism at its core, written by a fellow catcher out in California. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it was a really, really interesting story. Having those little segments in the newspaper, like it's just so awesome to see just a small community brought together through something so tiny, like a baseball game like that, a youth baseball game, especially with the world we live in now with social media and all that, just covering all the big stuff. That's the only thing that gets attention is all the big highlights.
Yeah.
Even when you see like crazy plays made like on Sports Center top 10 from small games, those rarely get covered. Like I saw something from the NAIA get covered on there in the top 10. It felt like forever since I had seen something from a smaller kind of community on like a big spotlight like that. So those kind of little newspaper segments right there just bring a community together and it's absolutely amazing. And I wish there was more of it in today's kind of journalism.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. The article, and we'll get more into it in just a second here, but it was written by Jim Boren in the Tracy Press for the Patterson Irrigator out in California. But in essence, it was about, when he remembered seeing his name in his local paper, back in the day, and how much that used to mean. And obviously, the newspaper industry, magazines, local television, all that stuff, there's been such a shift, like you said, kind of away from local coverage, local news coverage, local sports coverage. I worked in local TV for 12 years when I started my career. And, I made some different stops along the way in Kentucky and Kansas and Missouri. And we put such an emphasis on covering high school sports. And that was the thing was like at the end of the night, I remember our old news directors would always talk about, people that want the highlights from, let's say, for example, the Detroit Tigers or the Detroit Pistons or whatever, they're going to find that on SportsCenter or some of the national outlets that are out there. Our focus is going to be on high school sports because that's the only place you can get it is here, like on your local television coverage. And the same goes for the papers. And so that's what this article was. Like I remember my senior year, my name made the paper in the Delta Atlas, and I grew up in a town of like 2,500. The fact that we even had a local paper is a thing of beauty. And I still have the article, because, and it wasn't in the headline, it didn't say like, Johnny Kane did this, but I was in there and I saved it because it meant something. And I think that's one of the things you say in your commentary, which we'll get to, is like, you matter enough to be recorded. And I think that's important, I think that's important. And if we're being honest, like, how much coverage does, let's say, Rochester Christian University's baseball team get, and it's not all about like just, I don't know, I guess it's not about like just having your name in the paper or hearing about it, but it's kind of like your individual story. And then look at all your teammates. Like, what are the stories of these players? Like, how do we learn more about them? Like, I just think that's important, that there's so many athletes that may not be these top tier Division I, high profile, NIL money coming in, that there are tens of thousands of athletes across the country that are pursuing their dreams, but we don't hear about. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
It's just a tough thing. I mean, that's just, I guess it's just the way of the world. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's just kind of like that's the way of the world. We hear about the Division I programs, who's in contention for national titles, and how much are they getting paid, and the high profile coaches. But we really don't get to hear, a lot about the, these other athletes. So you mentioned, and I'm curious, like you talked about, like a shared sense of community. What do you mean by that?
Like I said earlier, just something so small, just your local baseball team kind of bringing everybody together, because that's one of the biggest things that I think brings a community together is sports in
Yeah,
general. Like a lot of people can rally around sports, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, soccer. A lot of people can rally around it. And I know that it reminds me of something that happened to me in high school when we won our district championship and had our huge upset over number 4 Rochester Adams. Nobody was talking about us prior to that because we were about 500 to end the regular season. We weren't the greatest team in the world. And then we upset Rochester Adams in the district championship. We got on the Channel 7 news. We got interviewed for the Channel 7 news the day after at our practice, and it was absolutely amazing. But
yeah,
that's one of those things where it's like that was a big event that happened. We won a championship and beat one of the best teams in the state just to get coverage.
yeah,
And all the little things before that, like nobody was talking about us.
yeah,
So that's my thing is just it's the little things that bring the community together because that put us on watch for the entire state. But it starts with just the Lake Orion community in itself.
yeah. I think that's the beauty of, I don't know. I mean, I hate to say it's like a, like it's not realistic, but how, like, coverage is coverage, so that's the beauty of having like these, these smaller publications. Like, again, the Patterson Irrigator is this publication that came out with this article that you referenced. But it is like in Lake Orion, say, where is the coverage there? Like, how can we learn about what's happening in our community? All that stuff is super, super important. And, can every sport, can every athlete be covered? Can we learn all the stories about all these people? To your point about the sense of community, that's what makes it a community. That's why we like our little neighborhoods in which we live. It's like, what's our neighbor's kid doing? Or what's, the kid down the street, like, what's he up to? There is value in all that stuff. I mean, that's what makes, our country so great, is like that type of exposure, even at some level. But a lot of times it takes doing something what you guys did in high school, in order to, knock off, say, like a juggernaut, to get some actual like statewide exposure. But that's the essence of local journalism. Why you love covering sports, why I love covering sports. Now I work primarily doing professional sports, obviously, which is great too. And we try to tell those stories of the kids, like where they came from, or the athletes, where they came from, what they're all about, their families. But it really does date back to when they were first getting started. Like, what are they all about? I loved covering high school sports, and I still get a chance to do it, a little bit. But as you kind of grow in the profession, you go, you kind of climb up the ranks and you start covering more of the higher profile sports and athletes. But I really treasured my time covering local stuff. I mean, I used to, when I was working in Topeka, Kansas, I remember, if I found out there was a kid signing a bowling scholarship somewhere, I would be at the auditorium at 7 a.m., to go do that, because I knew it mattered. And it might be one article where you're in the paper, or one time that you're on the local news channel, but that stuff does matter. And it kind of helps, I don't know, validate kind of what you're all about in life as you pursue your dreams. But
It's kind of things people just cherish forever.
yeah,
It's the little things.
it is. It really is. And that's good stuff. So, all right, we're going to get into it. I want to hear your commentary on this article. Again, the title of the story is "A Baseball Catcher's Youth League Story Might Just Be the Ticket to Rescuing Local Journalism." Here's Ayden Novak from Rochester Christian University.
What's up, everyone? Today, I want to talk about something that might sound small at first, but actually says a lot about where sports and even our communities are headed. So, picture this: you're a kid, you just finished playing in a local baseball game. Maybe you went 1 for 3, maybe you struck out twice, but it doesn't even matter because the next day, you open up your local newspaper and your name is in it. not on Instagram, not in a highlight clip, not buried in some algorithm, in the newspaper. That's real. That happened to a guy who was talking at a journalism panel recently. He said when he was a kid, his hometown paper printed the box scores from youth baseball games. And in tiny, almost microscopic font, it listed the pitcher and catcher, and there it was, his name. That moment stuck with him forever. And honestly, as a college baseball player myself, I get why. Because think about it. That's not just stats. That's not just a game. That's someone saying you matter enough to be recorded. And I think that's something we're kind of losing today. Back then, local newspapers didn't just cover the big stuff, they covered everything. City council meetings, school events, local businesses, and yeah, even youth baseball games. It didn't matter if you were a mayor or just a catcher in a random Tuesday night game. You were part of the story. And that created something we don't talk about enough anymore, a shared sense of community. Everyone could pick up the same paper and see themselves in it, or their neighbor, or their teammate. It connected people. Now compare that to today. We've got more content than ever. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, podcasts, but somehow we know less about what's actually happening right around us. Local newsrooms are shrinking. Reporters are getting laid off. And entire towns are becoming what people call news deserts, which basically means nobody's covering what's going on there anymore. No one's reporting on local teams unless they go viral. No one's telling the small stories that actually make a community feel like a community. And here's where it really hits sports. Because sports used to be one of the biggest ways local news connected people. It wasn't just about the pros. It was about your team, your school, your league, your friends. Now, if it's not a top recruit, a state championship, or something crazy, it barely gets attention. And that changes how we see sports. It becomes less about community and more about clout, less about participation and more about exposure. And don't get me wrong, social media is awesome. I mean, we're literally using it right now with sportscaster.com. But there's a difference between content and coverage. Content is what gets clicks. Coverage is what builds connection. Another thing that stood out to me from this story was something about analytics. Basically, a lot of news organizations say they don't cover local stories anymore because people aren't reading them. But at the same time, their entire business model is struggling. Maybe people would care if you actually covered their lives again. Because think about it. If your name showed up in an article or your team got a write-up or your game had a recap, you're reading that. Your parents are reading that. Your friends are sharing that. That's engagement. That's real. And I think that's where we come in. Because platforms like Sportscaster are kind of bringing that idea back, but in a new way. We may not be printing box scores in 6-point font, but we are telling stories. We're interviewing athletes. We're breaking down games. We're giving students a voice to cover their own communities. And honestly, that might be the future of local sports media. Not waiting for a big newspaper to show up, but becoming the storytellers ourselves. But here's the thing we have to remember. It's not just about highlights. It's not just about going viral. It's about paying attention. Because the article ended with this really powerful idea. It said, maybe communities don't look empty because nothing's happening. Maybe they look empty because no one is there to see it. No one is telling the stories. So yeah, maybe that tiny baseball box score doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is. Because it represents something bigger. A time when communities were documented, when people felt seen, and even the smallest moments mattered. And if we want to bring that feeling back, it starts with us, telling the stories, covering the games, highlighting the people who might not get the spotlight otherwise. Because at the end of the day, sometimes all it takes is seeing your name somewhere, anywhere, to feel like you're part of something bigger.
Ayden Novak from Rochester Christian University. That's it. Summed it up as well as it can be described. And I really appreciate his perspective on this. The difference between content and coverage, and kind of what generates clicks nowadays, as opposed to what really matters. we can't lose perspective on the things that do matter. I don't know if we'll ever get back to the way things were. And I'm sure there are a lot of you listening that can go back even further, however long ago it was. And I guess it's not so much about going back as it is about bringing back some of those things that we've lost touch with. If you'd like to read the story that Ayden Novak is referencing in his commentary, it's an article written by Jim Boren in the Tracy Press for the Patterson Irrigator. So go to pattersonirrigator.com and then just search Jim Boren. It'll pop up. It's the first story there. It's entitled "A Baseball Catcher's Youth League Story Might Just Be the Ticket to Rescuing Local Journalism." A good read, good commentary from Ayden. All right, when we come back, sportscaster Noah Shamami from Full Sail University, he gives his commentary about, do coaches need to stop cussing, or is it part of the game? It's a pivot, but it's worth a listen. You want to hear this. This is Sportscaster's Open Mic on WJR.